So, hello everyone, my name is Matthew Griffin. I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute. So I'm a futurist and strategic advisor. I work with royal households within the Middle East, as well as all of the governments in the Middle East and most of the multinationals basically throughout the world. And I look up to 50 years out. Now, as a little bit of an explainer, I cover over 600 exponential and emerging technologies to understand how they can be combined together to create new products and services. I cover hundreds of emerging trends, and then we bring all of this back down to Earth from Mars, obviously, to try to really understand what these signals mean for global culture, business, and society. Now, in this particular presentation, in this particular series, basically for Innovating for Growth, I've called this presentation the second half of the chessboard. Now, some of you might actually understand what I mean by that, and others might not. So, a little bit of a story first. Now, back in, it's estimated 1200 BC, there was a game maker, and this game maker made some of the best chess sets in the region in India. And famously, he knew that the king at that particular time, or the emperor of India at that particular time, was a very enthusiastic chess player. And so one day he was invited to the palace, and the emperor said, "I would like to buy a chess set from you." But the game maker, knowing that the emperor wasn't particularly good at maths, said, "In payment, I don't actually want gold, I don't want silk, I don't want any of the fine things that you have. All I want is to be paid in rice." And at that point, the emperor's thinking, well, okay, it's probably quite a good deal. And the game maker said, "And this is how I would like you to pay me. On the first day of every month, I want you to put 1 grain of rice onto the first square of the chessboard." And the king and the emperor's like, "Yeah, that's fine. And the month afterwards, I want you to double it. So in month 2, we have 2 grains of rice. Month 3, we have 4 grains of rice. Month 8, we have 8 grains of rice, and so on and so forth." Now, humanity has lived for a very long time in a world basically where the pace of change, the number of grains of rice on the chessboard has been going up relatively slowly. 1 to 2 to 4 to 8, 16, 32, 64, and so forth. So the technology equivalent of this particular barter is Moore's law. However, when you get to square 32 out of 64 on a chessboard, you have 2.1 million grains of rice. And after that point, the leaps from one board on the chessboard to another just go off the charts. They're exponential. Now, from a technology perspective, we've increasingly, over the past couple of years, moved out of this stage of each step being not too big, to each step, each next generation of technology being a giant leap forward. So, as we have a look at trying to get our heads around the second half of the chessboard, we have a huge amount of change and disruption already here and even more coming. So this means that we need a new acronym. So in the 1970s, the United States military coined the term VUCA in their term. So volatile, uncertain, complex, and an ambiguous world. However, increasingly we see the Vuca Max world emerging, where those changes that we're seeing are massive. They are system level. So we're talking about global politics, the global economy, global societal behaviors, and so on and so forth. But the changes are system level, not local any longer. The changes are also accelerating. The things that we are able to do today are more titanic in their consequences than they were yesterday. If you have a look at the pace of disruption 10 years ago, it's faster today. If you have a look at what technology can do today, it's much more significant than 10 years ago. and so forth. And then the changes are increasingly exponential because we live in an increasingly digital and connected world where I can be standing here and by the end of the day, if I execute something correctly, I could have almost half of the world's population using my product, my service, or listening to my fantastic, wonderful opinion. Now, in order to try to get our head around these, I write books. So these are kind of a memory backup for my brain, and you can download these codexes from the 311 Institute's website. But these go through all of the different technologies and trends basically that we're being subjected to on a daily basis, and then extrapolates them out up to at least 50 years. Now, just from the trends perspective, I've taken the Trends Codex and I put it into this little video that I'll show you now, because when we're trying to understand the direct and indirect impact that the global trends actually have on ourselves as individuals, but also businesses, this is what we as individuals and business leaders are trying to wrap our heads around. So, for example, when we have a look at the 250 megatrends, what are the impacts of all of these that I'm going to show you on you, your family, your business, and your country? So there we have 250 mega trends. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get our heads around all of these different things. Now, increasingly, as we move to the second half of the chessboard, we're moving into an era that I call the anti-quo. So when we think about the world's status quo, a status quo is typically used to explain a particular environment that doesn't really change. It's business as usual, it's commonplace. Yesterday looks pretty much like it did today, and it's the status quo. Now, what I mean by the anti-quo is this. Now, firstly, as a planet, we are now starting to move at the speed of digital. Now, to give you an example of this and the impact that this can have on the financial services industry, in June 2019, Mark Zuckerberg released his Libra cryptocurrency. And had he been able to successfully launch it, had the regulators allowed him to, then in the words of the chairman of the People's Bank of China, the US Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of England, it would have changed the global financial services status quo overnight. And the reason for that is because Mark Zuckerberg could have released his cryptocurrency at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, and 12 hours later, had he been able to execute properly, it could have been used by up to 2 billion people. So when we talk about the speed of change is digital, we can change the world, including the global financial services industry, in just a day under the right conditions. But there's more. We are now no longer just moving at the speed of digital. We are moving at the speed of artificial intelligence. Now, what I mean by this is when we have a look at that second half of the chessboard, this is how I think we increasingly all feel. We are increasingly the cavemen and women of old looking at this shiny tablet in front of us, and frankly, we don't really understand what it is, what we can use it for, or its true capabilities, or even its true nature. So when we have a look at artificial intelligence accelerating the status quo, increasingly we can use applications like Midjourney. So for example, Toyota are now using artificial intelligence to help them ideate new supercar designs and new consumer car designs in minutes, whereas it would have traditionally taken weeks, months, maybe even years. So artificial intelligence is accelerating how fast we can change the physical and digital worlds, also from a product perspective. In Germany, we have an artificial intelligence called Hyperganic that designed a new rocket engine that can be 3D printed in one day. How long does it normally take to design a rocket engine? Because it's definitely not normally one day. When we have a look at Google DeepMind's artificial intelligences, as well as in silico's artificial intelligences, are creating tens of thousands of new drugs in weeks. We can create new drug treatments in some cases in under 10 minutes. So imagine being able to create a new treatment for the medical industry in minutes, not in years. We've got Google again, as well as NVIDIA, using artificial intelligence to design computer chips and GPUs. So this again is an acceleration. So AI is ironically designing its own artificial intelligence chips. And then we've got AI writing code and software and all this sort of stuff. And AI is doing a lot more than this. But this is where I encourage you to think about the speed of change. We're no longer moving at the speed of digital. As a society, as an economy, as a business, you are now starting to move at the speed of AI. And that is a very, very different kind of speed. Now, in terms of framing the world, basically, when I was sort of putting this presentation together, there's lots of different ways I could actually put this. But from your perspective, consider this. We are moving into what I call a post-world. And this is almost where we backcast from today and look at the past, but we apply it to the future. Now, what I mean by this is, on the one hand, we have, and I did say I track hundreds of exponential technologies. We have, on this starburst, which goes up to the year 2075, there are 167 exponential technologies. Artificial intelligence is one of them. So when you're actually having a look at the world around you, we're looking for problems that need solving. That's the innovator's dilemma. We then combine these different technologies together to create our next generation products or services. And then we need to push them into the market, and that's execution. But when we have a look at all of the different powerful emerging technologies that we have, we've got things like 3D printing, 4D printing, we've got molecular assemblers coming through. We've got low Earth orbit communication systems coming through. By 2028 to 2032, we have 6G. When we have a look at computing, we are literally a few years away now from having incredibly powerful quantum computers. But we also have brain-scale neuromorphic computers that are already online in Australia. And a neuromorphic computer is essentially a supercomputer that can be packed onto nothing more than your thumbnail, that has more computing power than the world's biggest, most giant supercomputers. When we actually have a look at things like energy, we're at the start of an energy revolution. We have solar panels that are 132% energy efficient. And I talked about these basically at COP28, basically with your private wealth teams when I was keynoting. But when we have a look at intelligence, for example, we think AI is always going to be neural networks and binary, so machine learning. But we've already developed AIs that are DNA based, that can be printed. We've also got liquid and ionic artificial intelligences. So as we look into the future, even what we think of as being an artificial intelligence itself changes. Because if you have water on the desk in front of you, in 10 to 20 years' time, that could have an artificial intelligence running in it, because we've done it today. When we have a look at new materials, when we have a look at robotics, when we have a look at security, there are loads of things coming through. When we have a look at user experiences, we have neural interfaces, virtual reality, augmented reality, we even have telepathy. So when we have a look at the stable of emerging technologies that we have on our bench today that let us combine them together to create new products and services that change our world in new ways, this is about a third of them. Now, what I mean by the post world is this. Now, some of this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but think about this. As we launch tens of thousands of satellites into low Earth orbit to connect everyone and everything on the planet, increasingly, low Earth orbit communication satellites are starting to disrupt 5G. So, for example, in America, there are many places you can't get 5G, like the mountains, the wilderness, in some of the deeper cities, and so on and so forth. But you can actually get internet access from space-based systems. So we could argue that as these space-based systems become faster, more reliable, as their latency drops, do we actually need 5G? So we can see a post-5G world emerging. And of course, we will still have 5G and 6G, and it will be coupled with satellite systems. But nevertheless, we could move to a post-5G world. The post-app world. Now, the next iteration of artificial intelligence are what we call action models. So if you look at your smartphones, you've got lots of apps to do lots of different things. But as we get to the point where we can talk to our devices, where we can talk to artificial intelligences using natural language, and where those AIs are able to then do things, perform an action, do we need apps? Because you simply ask your smartphone or your device, I want a pizza. And it knows the kind of pizza that you want. It places the order with the local pizza delivery company, and you get it in 30 minutes. Why do you need an app for that? So we're already starting to see all of the different technologies that we need to put together to eliminate the entire app ecosystem. And let's face it, the app ecosystem will be here for years because it's highly profitable for Google and Huawei and Apple. But nevertheless, we don't need them. We're moving to a post-car world. So Toyota and Audi have been talking about the post-car world for a while. Because if you have a car that drives itself, if you have a car that doesn't have any brakes, it doesn't have any brake pedals, that'd be a different one if it didn't have any brakes. But if you have a car that doesn't have any pedals, doesn't have a dashboard, it doesn't have a steering wheel, is it a car or is it a pod? Just a blank space. So we are moving to the post-car world already, as we see self-driving cars and vehicles emerge. The post-cow world. In Mazda and along the Sheikh Zayed Road, there are cellular laboratories that grow meat. So we can take a cell from an animal, put it into a technology called a bioreactor, and grow a beef burger that is a beef burger. It's not plant-based, it's not artificial meat, it is real meat, but without the cow. And we can apply this technology, and are applying this technology, to feed 1 billion people on the planet who go hungry each night, but we can make meat without the animal. The post-developer world. Now on this one, I'm a little bit ahead of the gun. However, 66% of developers, software developers, are worried about AI taking their jobs. And increasingly, as artificial intelligence gets better and better and better at writing code and creating programs, we do start moving to a post-developer world. When we have a look at global reserve currencies, we talk about the post-dollar world as we start seeing the BRICS emerge and as we start seeing new payment rails, new digital currencies coming through, for example, to support the BRICS, aka in India, and so on and so forth. So we talk about the post-dollar world. We also have the post-factory world. So when we have a look at companies like Adidas, they can now 3D print your sneakers and different fashion items, so sports apparel, in the back of their stores. Now, while we will still have factories, if Adidas can print all of its trainers and sneakers in the back of a store using 3D printers, does Adidas need a factory? We have the post-farm world. So on the Sheikh Zayed Road, just near Dubai again, for example, if you want to go and see these, we have vertical farms. Now, if you can grow kale and lettuce and different crops within a vertical farm, then you don't need to grow those crops in a field. So then, are we moving into the post-farm world? When we have a look at fiat currencies, there's this massive debate over CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. However, in a world of crypto, Web3 and decentralized finance, do we really need fiat? Because when we actually have a look at Nike lets you buy virtual products with moves. IKEA in Dubai will let you buy products or at least get a discount on products using the time that you took to get to the store. So when we talk about the post-fiat world specifically, we're talking about simply creating new types of value, not necessarily value stores, because Bitcoin doesn't have a value store, but we can create new value in new ways that we can then trade. So we can see the post-fiat world. And of course, we will still have fiat currencies because governments will create the regulatory environment that they need to ensure that their fiat currencies are still being used and are still the primary method of currency in any particular country. But the fact of the matter is, right now, you and I could create an FAB cryptocurrency, and if we were all happy accepting that cryptocurrency to trade goods and services, we never need the fiat currency. Now, many people will love this slide, but you shouldn't. So we are increasingly moving to the post-hacker world. Now here, we have artificial intelligences that are able to create malware either automatically or autonomously. There's a difference between automated and autonomous. And then push those pieces of malware and ransomware out into the world. So increasingly, robo-hackers are weaponized artificial intelligences that are able to hack and exploit systems at least 100 million times faster than a human hacker. So human hackers, they're going to be sidelined more and more as we start seeing AI do more of the heavy lifting. We have a post-oil world. Now, this is obviously an energy generation, not chemicals or polymers and that sort of stuff. But we have a post-oil world because we are increasingly moving from using fossil fuels as our source of energy to renewable energy. We're also moving increasingly to the post-knowledge economy world. So I do a lot of work with universities, and as part of these university think tanks, we bring in lots of different people, and increasingly there are lots of companies out there that are now starting to think, well, as artificial intelligence becomes so intelligent, and that's a debate that we can have, then increasingly as humans, we don't need to keep the same amount of knowledge in our heads that we used to. AI also has an impact on hard skills, which I'll discuss later. And so a lot of organizations, 78% of organizations now are hiring for soft skills because they know that they can teach the hard skills. And then we'll talk in a little while about what we do with the hard skills. But this is where increasingly we're talking about moving from a knowledge-based economy to a relationship-based economy. So moving from hard skills, the knowledge and skills that you have in your head, to your soft skills. We're moving to the post-software world. Andreessen Horowitz famously said years ago, he said, software is eating the world. And now we have people saying AI is eating software. So this is where increasingly we talk about artificial intelligence creating software, but this software is different. These are what we call generative applications. So we're moving from a software as we know it world to a generative application world, which has fundamentally different characteristics, behaviors, capabilities, and upsides, and also downsides. We're moving to the post-truth world. By 2030, it's estimated that artificial intelligence will have created at least 10% of all of the information on the internet. We're already seeing it. If you use Google, if you use any other search platform out there, increasingly, how do you know what information to trust? If you look at the social networks, they're flooded with disinformation, misinformation, fake news. So increasingly, from an individual perspective, we are reaching the point where you cannot trust the information that you are reading or being exposed to. In a business context, we're even seeing criminals who are creating fake reports and then putting those reports at the top of Google Ads, and then companies download those reports, and then they base their decisions and their investment advice and their information on fake reports. So we're moving to a post-truth world, and that's really before we dig into what happens when artificial intelligence can increasingly manipulate and create synthetic content. And then we're moving also very slowly, much slower than Mark Zuckerberg would like, to the post-world world, because we are increasingly creating virtual worlds that we can inhabit, that we can work in, that we can play in, that we can explore. So when you're having a look at the world that we have today, and when you're trying to figure out what the future could look like, then using sort of this backcasting post method is quite useful. And when we have a look at the next stage of artificial intelligence, as we gather more and more data together, increasingly we don't just want to analyze what's going on today, we want to be able to predict it. So in the retail space, in the banking space, we've been using artificial intelligence to try to predict consumer behaviors and create hyper-personalized experiences for quite a while now. But we're also using artificial intelligence combined with different signals that we see on the dark web to create cybersecurity platforms that can predict that you are going to get attacked, because they see people in this forum talking about your company. They see people in that forum downloading these exploits or creating these kinds of exploits and malware, pieces of malware, for example. And then we're able to take that data and extrapolate out that you are likely to be attacked with a SQL injection attack. Now, when we look at cyber predictions, we recently had a company called Forta. They are an on-chain cybersecurity company, and they predicted that Euler Hermes, the sort of insurance company, was going to see over $250 million worth of cryptocurrency drained from their blockchain protocol. And guess what? Euler Hermes, minutes later, did actually lose $250 million. And the only reason basically why Euler Hermes couldn't stop the attack that Forta predicted using analytics and everything else was because there was no way for Euler Hermes to unplug all of their server farms in 2 minutes. So reaction speeds are out of kilter. Disease predictions. Now, we all lived through COVID-19. We had 2 years where half the planet was in some form of different lockdown. But what if we could actually predict the next disease outbreak and then create the vaccines before the disease outbreak actually happened? Now, in the United States, Harvard and MIT have been using artificial intelligence to try to predict how different viruses would mutate. And they've been accurate 65% of the time. And if you know how a virus is going to mutate and which ones are the most contagious and the most likely to escape, etc., then you can create a vaccine for that. And using artificial intelligence, we can create vaccines now in 7 minutes because we've done it. So we are not just getting to the point where we can predict new disease outbreaks and then pre-create the vaccines before those disease outbreaks actually happen to vaccinate the population. We're also at the point where we can take information from our bodies, biomarkers, biometrics, and so on and so forth, and using artificial intelligence, predict when you're going to have a heart attack. So this, when we have a look at the health insurance companies, what if I could predict when you're going to have a heart attack and send the ambulance before you have the heart attack, so you don't necessarily need to have the heart surgery or have to wait for someone else to die to get their heart before you can live again. So predictive health is being supercharged by artificial intelligence, but also by our ability to create sensing systems that gather the information from different places like our bodies. If any of you have got children, increasingly universities are, as well as schools, but universities especially, are using artificial intelligence to predict the performance of your children in schools and universities. Some universities, when your children actually apply to university, some universities are actually applying artificial intelligence to try to figure out which students are more likely than the others to drop out halfway through the courses. And guess what? If the AI thinks that you are likely to drop out halfway through your course because it's seen a particular set of data that suggests that, your children don't get the university place. So we obviously also apply this in a business setting where we use artificial intelligence and different information sets from within the business to try to predict sales, to try to predict performance and outcomes and results and so on and so forth. And of course, when we have a look at, say, quantitative traders, they are famous for using artificial intelligence to try to predict stocks. But with quantitative traders, they're now trading at nanosecond speed. So this kind of gives regulators a problem, because if these bots start going off the rails, if they go a little bit rogue, then there's no way we can turn them off in time. So we're moving really basically from not just the world that we knew to a world where increasingly we're going to be trying to predict everything, even some odd things that maybe you hadn't actually thought of before. And when we actually have a look at company structures themselves, I started talking about this in about 2016, and I've got a special video for you that very few people have seen in a minute. What if artificial intelligence could create a company? Now, a little while ago, about 3 weeks ago, I was in Riyadh. We used artificial intelligence to build 5 businesses in 25 minutes. We built a publishing company, a software development company, an art gallery, a fashion company. We designed all of the different, in this case, we used AI to design the trainers and everything else. That took about 5 seconds. And we personalized them for the Saudi Arabian market. But we also developed and soft launched a bank. So in 25 minutes, we used artificial intelligence to build and launch 5 businesses. Think about that when you're thinking about the speed of change. Think about that when you're thinking about the cost of starting and launching a business. And think about that from FAB's perspective. What happens when you have 1 billion people with access to these kinds of tools? Who are your new competitors? Because from a competitive perspective, it could be almost everyone, even 18-year-olds in Riyadh. Now, in the United States, we also assigned a variety of different artificial intelligence agents because we're moving from AI bots to AI agents. Really try to understand what an agent is. An artificial intelligent agent is a very sophisticated kind of bot that can understand what it is you want it to do, and then it can interact with other AI agents to get that thing done. So in this particular case, we created a company of bots. We had CEO, CFO, CHRO, and so on and so forth. And we told the bots, the agents, to create a software business. 7 minutes later, and after having spent $1 on compute, these AIs had built an enterprise CRM platform. How we build businesses, how we launch, scale, and operate businesses is changing at a fundamental level, which means that you are going to be swamped by competitors that you never saw coming. Then we have this. Now, in 2016 and 2019, I ran a series with Accenture, and I talked about the company of 2040, where we would eventually see artificial intelligences that could build businesses, launch, scale, and operate businesses. And 3 weeks ago, Sam Altman did this little podcast. This is a 1.5 minute recording, but I strongly suggest you listen to it and really think about the implications on the bank, but also the companies you work with, the partners you work with, and the investments you make. So AIs that can build multi-billion-dollar companies for pretty much 0 cents. And Sam Altman is backed by $90 billion artificial intelligence, a war chest basically of around $10 to $20 billion. And when we have a look at GPT-5, that's really where this starts becoming real. So this means that we're moving basically from a world of post-digital transformation. So we do digital transformation today, and increasingly as organizations, we are using artificial intelligence within our organizations to do things, make decisions, perform actions, which means that we even have the post-digital transformation world, because I think that we are now moving to a world where we are seeing companies do intelligence transformations. And this is a very different kind of project to a digital transformation project. But if you have a look basically within your own bank, basically there are a lot of algorithms running and scurrying around. So you're already doing this, but it's just not formalized yet. And then when we have a look at AI, the AIs that we have today have verbal IQs of 155, putting them in the top 1% of all humans. They have 1,000 times more general knowledge in their heads than any human. This is ChatGPT. And this means that Geoffrey Hinton described ChatGPT and these large language models in this way: a fundamentally superior learning algorithm. When we have a look at artificial general intelligence, which is really about 2028 to 2032 now estimated, These AIs, it's estimated again, will have a verbal IQs of 1,600 and a billion times more information in their heads. And Sam Altman himself, that you just saw, describes AGI as an artificial intelligence that outperforms humans at all economically valuable work. So the host in that particular one talked about a seminal moment. Doesn't this start affecting the entire global services industry? Now, thanks to artificial intelligence becoming more cognitively able, we're actually seeing the average half-life of skills dropping to 5 years. So the skills that you have today, in 5 years' time, from a company perspective, will be half as valuable. And then they drop down again. Now, this is why at the universities basically that I lecture at, we talk about the need for switchable hard skills, because as artificial intelligence manages to perform certain hard skills like program development, project management, and so on and so forth, we need to, as humans, we need to be able to move from that hard skill to this hard skill at speed. But we also need very solid soft skills, as I mentioned earlier, because soft skills, or power skills, as the head of Oracle recently told me when I was in Spain the other day, solid soft skills are increasingly vital to the success of businesses. Being able to collaborate and communicate with colleagues, empathize, being resourceful, being empathetic, all these kinds of things, being creative and curious. Those are the skills that are going to be more in demand even now. So fundamentally, we need to be able to adapt and learn at speed. If you want to survive the future and thrive in the future, you need to be able to identify what's happening, and you need to be able to understand how to adapt to those changes that you see happening, but also coming. But then you also need to be able to learn at speed. And how many of you were ever taught how to learn? Now, again, using artificial intelligence, with many people around the world, we've been able to use platforms like ChatGPT and Google Bard to accelerate people's learning 12-fold. So imagine being able to learn anything that you wanted, any subject that you wanted, and then being able to learn it 12 times faster than you could in a classroom. I did that with my daughter, and she managed to skip an entire year of school. And there's a story about that. And if you want to see that, then you can go to my YouTube channel. Now, in terms of employability as well, yes, artificial intelligence is going to partially automate and fully automate some jobs. But in terms of employability, we see the end of T-shaped individuals coming, because as artificial intelligence automates a particular job, you need to be able to move to a different career track, another career path. But the reason why we're seeing the end of T-shaped individuals is because most of you will be a T-shaped individual. You are very good at one thing, and that's what your company employs you to do. However, if I asked you on this call, how many of you are software developers? From what I see with most audiences, probably 5% of you know how to code software. However, here we go. Using artificial intelligence, you can simply talk to an AI or type into an AI, create a software program that looks like this and that does this with these functions, and the AI will write the code. And this is a Stripe Laravel payment integration that I wrote for Visa, again, when I was in Spain another time. And as you can see, the AI has just written a Stripe Laravel integration, payment integration. And then I ask it how to execute it and how to deploy it, and it tells me how to do that. So as artificial intelligence automates particular skills and jobs and tasks, that gives you as an individual access to those jobs, skills, and tasks. You are all now capable of writing some form of software. even though you were never ever trained in it at school. AI can be used to identify skills gaps, hard and soft skills gaps. Then we can use AI increasingly to create tailored training programs for you, a little bit like I did with my children. So AI, used correctly, actually makes you more employable, helps you release your true potential in new ways, and gives you access to skills that you were never trained in. And so finally, from a leadership perspective, how you think about the future is how you feel about the future, is how you act about the future. So if you are optimistic about the future, you go out and you look at how you can create this future. If you are not optimistic about the future, if you're pessimistic, then you go and shut yourself away and you do everything that you can to try to stop that future from coming through. And we see that with quite a number of politicians in the United States. So how you think about something affects how you feel about it, affects how you act about it. Now, when we have a look at these different technologies, and as an example of this, from 2028, we will have new healthcare breakthroughs that could extend your lives by 25 or more years. 3D printed human organs, new gene therapies, new antibiotics, and all sorts of things. So hopefully that probably makes you feel quite good. When we talk about your power, the only things that you all have access to is all the world's knowledge, all the world's skills, and the ability to build and launch businesses this morning. And if you can execute, you could have 2 to 4 billion people using them by the end of the day. You have never been as powerful as you are today as an individual. But what do you do with it? What's your purpose? What's your individual mission? And then as individuals, you have two mindsets. The world's top performers look at what they can achieve versus what they can avoid. So giving you an example, as a CEO of a startup, you might look at what you want to achieve. You want to help people. You want a big house, a fancy car. If you look at what you want to achieve, you're much more likely to put a strategy in place to help you achieve it. It's a strategic choice. But if you look at what you want to avoid, I want to avoid making people redundant. I want to avoid cutting wages or whatever it happens to be. I want to avoid bankruptcy. Then people who look at the world from an avoider's perspective think tactically. So if you want to be a top performer, think, what do you want to achieve? And then you put the things in place to achieve it. Also, when we look at respond versus react, every single time you do something, you think you're reacting. You know, and I wouldn't do this, but if I slapped you in the face and you slapped me back, you'd react. But actually, as individuals, for example, as I've shown you these different things about the future, you can react. You can have that knee-jerk reaction. But you always have the choice to respond. There is a big difference between these two. You might think that you are reacting to different situations and events and things, but you are always in control. You always have the choice to respond. This is a very different concept to react. And then finally, you need to unlearn everything that you've learned, because the world does not work in the way that it used to work. The future plays by new rules, and those rules are the second half of the chessboard. You need to be able to be comfortable with ambiguity and change, and you need to embrace ambiguity and change. And that is it from me, and I think we have some Q&As now. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope it got you thinking.